Maria Kokkori is a research fellow at the Art Institute of Chicago, and she holds an MS degree in chemistry from the University of Cambridge and an MA in conservation of easel paintings and PhD from the Courtauld Institute of Art in London, which she received in 2008. She then completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the Courtauld. Between 2009 and 2011, she was a postdoctoral research fellow of the Malevich Society in New York, and she is a member of the Cambridge Courtauld Russian Arts Center, the CCRAC, advisory board, and member of the board of directors of the Malevich Society in New York. And she'll be presenting work which she has been doing together with Francesca Casadio and Kristen Lister. I'll just give you a brief biography of them both. Francesca is here in the audience, and she'll be chairing the next session. She joined the Art Institute of Chicago in 2003 to establish their lab, and she's also established very fruitful collaborations with the Northwestern University and Art Institute of Chicago's Center for Scientific Studies in the Arts, the NU Access, which we heard about yesterday. She received her PhD and MS degrees from the University of Milan, which is not very far from where I work, and is the author of over 80 publications in scientific and conservation literature. I don't think you need much more introduction because we all know about Francesca. The final author is Kristen Herman Lister, who has been a paintings conservator at the Art Institute since 1996. She previously worked in Yale and at the Fine Arts Museum in San Francisco, and she's published extensively on Matisse, Jasper Johns, Van Gogh, Gauguin, and Homer. So please, Maria.
Thank you, Austin. In spite of major exhibitions, publications, and conferences, the work of Kazimir Malevich still confronts the researchers with moments of mystery and enigma. And here you could see some of the most recent exhibitions where Malevich paintings were included. The Kazimir Malevich and the Russian Avant-Garde Art at the Stedelijk Museum, an exhibition that finished a couple of weeks ago. The Inventing Abstraction, where paintings by Kazimir Malevich were included at the MoMA in 2013. From Russia at the Royal Academy in London 2008. The forthcoming exhibition at the Tate Gallery that opens in mid-July this summer. And of course, this recent developed interest in Russia for abstract art, and especially Malevich. Just for the history, in 1933, all museums, following Stalin's instructions, where it was decided that all museums should remove abstract paintings from public display. So all paintings and also abstract art was excluded from all possible education levels. So practically all museums removed the paintings from the walls to the storage rooms, where the paintings remained for almost 50 years until the perestroika time. But there is a turn in history. Here you could see Vladimir Putin. Practically he goes in all openings of Malevich exhibitions. A painting by Malevich used as a logo for the summit of G20 in St. Petersburg. And of course, a painting by Malevich projected on the floor in the opening ceremony for the Winter Olympics at the Sochi 2 weeks ago. In spite of this great interest, issues related to Malevich's preferences and use of materials and techniques still defy adequate explanation or have yet to be examined in detail. Which painting materials did he use? What influenced the choice of materials? Where did he find the stimulus for his choice of materials and techniques? And in what way are these modified within the artistic processes? These are only some of the many questions that still have to be answered. The focus of this presentation today is a 1915 painting from the Art Institute of Chicago collection. It presents the results of a collaborative research carried out by scientists, conservators, and curators, which have led to a more in-depth understanding of the materials and techniques used in this painting. Painted realism of a football player, color masses in the fourth dimension, is an impressive painting constructed of color geometric forms representative of Kazimir Malevich's suprematist period. It was acquired by the Art Institute of Chicago in 2011, and it's still the only painting by Malevich in the museum collection. This painting played a very important role in Malevich's artistic career and has a uniquely rich exhibition history. It is executed in oil paint on a canvas support and was titled by Malevich Football Player, Footballist, and as described on the verso, and dated 1915. The first part of the title, Painter Realism of a Football Player, may have been a reference to Boccioni's futurist painting, Dynamism of a Football Player, painted 2 years earlier in 1913, which was very well known among Russian avant-garde artists, and also it had been reproduced in numerous art journals published in 1913 until the outbreak of the First World War. The second part of the painting's title, Color Masses in the Fourth Dimension, refers to the mathematical theory of fourth-dimensional space, a concept appropriated by many early 20th century avant-garde artists to justify their work beyond immediate sensory perception. And here you could see two of the most popular books published in Russia before the First World War. The Fourth Dimension, written by the Russian theosophist Peter Uspensky, and the Primer of Higher Space, the Fourth Dimension, written by the American architect Claude Brandon. The Claude Brandon book was reprinted in Russian for more than 5 times because it includes this wonderful story of the destiny of a cube when it travels a 2-dimensional plane, how it changes from a cube to a black square. And here again you could see the relationship with Malevich's black square. Returning to the painting was one of the 49 suprematist works participating in the groundbreaking exhibition 0.10, the last futurist exhibition of paintings organized in Petrograd in 1915. In this exhibition, Malevich debuted his new ism in art. He produced a series of abstract works where color geometric shapes were painted against white backgrounds, and he declared that this constitutes an entire new system of art, the suprematism. The numeration 0.10, used in the title in this exhibition, it's another mystery in art history. It's still unclear from where it derived. However, as Malevich wrote, he wanted to push the formal discoveries of cubism and futurism to their limits and find the zero of painting. Painter Realism of a Football Player belongs to this very first group of Malevich's suprematist work. In 1927, Malevich traveled with an exhibition of his paintings to Warsaw in Poland and also went to Germany, where his work was shown at the Great German Art Exhibition in Berlin. As you might have already noticed in the photograph, the painting was displayed in two different orientations. And this was in accordance with Malevich's philosophy. After 1915, Malevich abandoned a definite top and bottom of his abstract works, instead insisting on a non-referential space. At his exhibitions between 1915 and 1927, he hung his suprematist paintings in all possible orientations. Actually, that became very popular in London in 2008, where in exhibition at Tate, a Rothko painting was displayed upside down. So after that, the Sunday Times and Guardian, they had quizzes where Rothko paintings and Malevich paintings, they were together, and the readers, they have to find out the right orientation, the right way of displaying these works. And in these quizzes, even the black square was included, which is kind of no sense because it was a square. So, but it was highly amusing at the time. So to go back to Malevich's visit in Berlin, while in Berlin, Malevich had the opportunity to meet artists and teachers at the Bauhaus School, and his friend Tadeusz Paper introduced him to Laszlo Macholinaz. Laszlo Macholinaz invited Malevich to contribute an essay on his new ism, on suprematism, and that's exactly what Malevich did. In the same year, he wrote his famous essay, The Non-Objective Art, that was translated in German, published at the Bauhaus series number 11, and the text had been edited by Laszlo Macholin. There are some key events in Malevich's artistic career that affected his choice of painting materials and techniques. In August 1904, at the age of 24, the Ukrainian-born Malevich moved to Moscow in order to attend the Moscow School of Painting, Sculpture, and Architecture. He attempted to enroll 4 times, but was never admitted. So from 1906 until 1910, he studied at the private workshop of Fyodor Erbek, who prepared his students for the entrance examinations. Rembrandt was a very well-known impressionist artist in Russia and very well traveled to Western countries. So Malevich's early development as a painter was strongly influenced by Rembrandt's artistic theory and practice. At Rembrandt Private Art School, Malevich learned the fundamentals of paint and perspective, anatomy and composition, and studied Impressionism. And this is what Malevich recalled for this period in his diaries. Ever since those days, he wrote, tube palettes, brushes, umbrellas, folding chairs have given me no peace of mind. Rembrandt wrote some of the most influential painting manuals of the period. These are invaluable sources of information, not only because they include comments on the Russian painters' methods and materials, but also because they are primary evidence of paint technology at the time and contemporary artistic practices. In this book, Rembrandt included sections on color theory, complementary colors, and the origins and chemical properties of painting materials. Rembrandt stressed also in his manuals the importance of chemical interaction in painting materials and concentrated on the chemical characteristic of the pigments as well as on their individual handling properties. He also included reports on various aging tests carried out on locally produced and also imported tube paints. Some of the tests of this aging tests were actually carried out by Rembrandt. Some other tests they were copied from. He copied them from Weber for Weber manuals without referring to Weber, but it's exactly copy-paste from Weber. So it's always nice to check the reliability of reference sources. At the time Malevich painted the football player, there were two main art suppliers in Moscow, Datsiaro and Avanzo, as you could see, which are they were in one of the most, in Kuznetsky Most, which is a central street in Moscow. They were both shops, they were the best known art shops and also a meeting place for artists, aristocratic and bourgeois elites. These shops also served as exhibition spaces. Russian avant-garde artists were displaying their works, and that included Malevich as well. And this display was an exchange covering the cost of materials. Both the Datsiaro and Avanzo families remained in the trade until a year after the October Revolution of 1917, where the shops were closed down and the stock of materials was distributed to state fine art schools. In their price list are listed all materials imported from England, France, and Germany, as well as those produced in Russia. And the companies mentioned are Mives Smith, which were German companies, Lefranc from France, and Dosekin, which was the Russian company producing tube paints. Actually, Dosekin was one of the most popular companies, most popular paints produced in Russia at the time. And many Russian avant-garde artists referred to Dosekin in their diaries and manuscripts, and that include Malevich, Ivan Klyun, Lyubov Popova, Alexander Rodchenko. So it was, Dosekin tube paints were very popular among Russian artists. And here you could see a selection of the tubes produced at the time. More pictures from the price list, brushes available, and the famous box number 12, in which Malevich referred to it twice in his diaries. It was actually a present by his mother at his, I think, 20th birthday, but he was very much impressed by the beauty of this box. For the technical examination of the painting, we use a combination of complementary techniques, including X-ray, infrared reflectography, and UV imaging, microscope examination, and standard non-invasive analysis of pigments and binding media, such as XRF and reflectance FTIR. Football Player is a complex work, although it doesn't look like, but most of these works, they look very simple, but they are very complicated in terms of both inorganic and organic materials used for the paint. To gain a better understanding of what was going on below the surface, the painting was first X-rayed, and X-radiography can reveal information about the painting support, damages, and alteration to the composition. And in fact, the X-rays in this painting reveal changes in composition, especially in the black geometric shape on the left part of the composition at the lower left part of it. A complementary technique, infrared reflectography, was also employed, and infrared revealed features not visible to the naked eye, such as underdrawings and changes in the painting. I will show you later on details of the infrared reflectograms, but in this case, the reflectogram provided a clear image of changes in the painting, especially in the lower part of it. The painting is in an amazingly good condition, especially so considering that this group of Malevich's works left behind at the 1927 Berlin exhibition has been stored unstretched in a box for many, many years, even when it changed locations. And later the painting was wax-lined at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam. And then it has undergone all the cycles of varnishing, devarnishing, unvarnishing, revarnishing. Now it is unvarnished, but at least I'm aware of these three major conservation treatments since 1957. Under ultraviolet illumination, you could see that the white layer exhibits the bright yellowish-white fluorescence characteristic of zinc oxide. There are two preliminary drawings related to this composition. The upper one is more related to the final composition than the lower one. What is still there are differences. The green ball, the football ball, is not there. There are some changes there, but again, this is in accordance to Malevich's technique. For the majority of his paintings, there exist numerous preliminary drawings that can be related to the final composition. What is impressive here is the size of this tiny, practically is a micro drawing. It has the size of a post stamp. It's 4.5 by 5. Which is, again, could be explained within the context of materials available in Russia at the time. Although 45% of Russia is covered with forests, they never had a decent production of paper. So they used to import paper from Latvian, from the countries, from Latvia, from Germany, from Finland, but paper was a very luxurious and rare material at the time. To investigate the color schemes of the composition and the degree to which they had been worked up, XRF analysis was carried out in key area of the paintings. Analysis revealed the use of the reveal Malevich palette used in this painting, which included lead white, zinc white for the whites, vermilion, lead chromate for the yellow area, bone black, emerald green, ultramarine blue, and cobalt violet. In the suprematist paintings, Malevich generally positioned geometric forms in space to suggest a directional movement by implying forces such as attraction and repulsion that could lead to the alignment, concentration, and dispersal. In this work, the concentration of energy, according to Malevich's theory, is on two separate edges of the painting plane. Malevich contrasted also two sets of complementary colors, the purple-yellow of large forms over a long distance and the red-green contrast of smaller forms over a short span. This painting follows it's a typical example of Malevich's Malevich's technique, especially for his suprematist works. Malevich usually began a painting with a white ground, then sketched the shapes on it with pencil. Next, he used to add a color to the forms, using a paper card laid over the adjacent white to create a straight color edges. He rarely used rulers or other tools to make straight lines. It seems that he preferred this paper to position paper and then draw a line. And then he followed by painting around the sketch forms with a second or more slightly different layers of white. For this work, Malevich applied a white ground spreading thinly so that the texture of the canvas remained prominent. XRF analysis has determined that the ground is primarily lead white, but was also confirmed by reflectance FTIR. Lead white is present throughout the painting, and zinc white is used for the white background and also in admixtures with the paints as indicated by XRF analysis and reflectance FTIR. Reflectance FTIR was used to further characterize the paint media. The presence of zinc oxide can be confirmed in all examining areas, as well as the presence of drying oil binder, but also to identify zinc stearates, zinc oxalates, and manganese palmitate. The stearates and palmitates can be related to the paint form formulation, but the oxalates are more related to degradation products rather than the formulation of paint. There is a sharp inverted peak at 1272 that could possibly be attributed to cellulose nitrate or phthalate. It's still the identification of this peak is still under investigation, but the cellulose nitrate might be related to previous conservation treatments. XRF analysis also showed varying amounts of barium, and the presence of barium suggested barium sulfate in the paint tube formulation, or the presence of lithopon. The presence of barium is more significant in the ground layers than the upper layers. This lovely enamel appearance of the white surface, it reminds of enamel paints or industrial paints, and it's tempting to think that it might be a different type of paint. However, a microdestructive analysis, an analysis of tube paints available in Russia, in pre-revolutionary Russia, I showed that the majority of paints produced at the time and available at the time contained, in terms of inorganic analysis, zinc or zinc in mixture with barium, or just simple zinc, barium, or some German paints. In some German paints they were using mixture of zinc, lead, and barium sulfate. From an organic point of view, technology was much more advanced and complicated. It's practically a paradise for mass spectrometry analysis. You could find as many possible materials there as ever. So to go to the yellow areas, all yellow areas showed chromium and lead indicated the presence of lead chromate. And around the forms, you could see part of the ground exposed, which is the lead white ground, that was later covered with a more thinly or thickly painted layers of zinc white. And you could see this very straight delineation following the preliminary at the drawing. In this case, Malevich goes slightly over it, but you could see through the small holes the preliminary drawing, and these very smooth paste-like surfaces. In this picture, the blue stripe has no yellow underneath. When forms, and see something that you could see under the microscope, actually the yellow goes up to the intersecting area, up to the overlapping area, but it doesn't really go under the blue. So in Malevich's paintings, when form were to be seen as overlapping, they don't necessarily overlap. As a comparison of XRF spectra of the upper and lower part of the yellow trapezoid form showed that that Malevich firstly painted the upper part of the yellow shape, then he applied zinc white around it, he painted the blue stripe, and then he extended the yellow shape over the already painted zinc white layer in the place we would expect to see it as part of an overlapping between the yellow and the blue, which is kind of optical illusion. So always we see what we want to see, but in this case there is no yellow under the blue, and it's something that was observed in other areas and also in other suprematist paintings by Malevich. Malevich also enlarged the black square painted by Bone Black, as you could see in the X-ray. It was initially painted smaller, and then he applied zinc white around the area of the black square, and then he extended the black square in all 4 directions by over 1 centimeter in order to bring the forms into a tighter grouping. Red areas were also characterized by the presence of mercury that indicated vermilion, and the rectangular is another change Malevich did during the coloring stage. He extended the red. It was initially painted as smaller, and then painted with vermilion, and then he extended the whole shape towards the right-hand side of the painting by 4 centimeters, again making the whole grouping of forms tighter and closer together. Both historical artistic documentation and previous destructive examination of other Malevich artworks revealed the extended use by Malevich of French ultramarine. XRF analysis in vacuum confirmed the presence of ultramarine, and also the analysis by reflectance FTIR that shows the presence of ultramarine, barite, and also traces of zinc stearates and hydrated magnesite. We have an extensive reference library at the Art Institute of Chicago that allow us to compare reference samples with the examining samples from the examining areas of Malevich's paintings. On the green area, copper resulted to be correlated with arsenic, suggesting the use of copper arsenide pigments such as emerald green. Schiller's green cannot be excluded, However, emerald green seems more likely to be present. First, because Schiller's green was not really available in the early 20th century in Russia due to its tendency to blacken. Second, because emerald green was of the most commonly found pigments on Malevich oil paintings. He used to refer to colors by using names of pigments. So instead of saying blue sky, he used to say ultramarine sky. Or instead of describing a green forest, he described it as an emerald green forest. So there are certain references in his writings and diaries where the list of pigments he was more familiar with are listed. FTIR analysis also indicated the presence of chrome yellow, barium sulfate, and carboxylates, possibly copper oxalates. To go back to this small green shape, what is very interesting is that this is the only geometric shape on the canvas that has no zinc underneath. It is painted directly on the ground support. That indicates that most possible Malevich started the composition by applying the ground layer, then he placed this small green ball, and then he developed the rest of the composition according to this first geometric shape, which is kind of impressive because the rest of the geometric shapes are much bigger and more, and they are in relation to each other. For the purple area, Malevich used a pigment known for its transparency, cobalt violet, and carefully controlled the brushwork, applying thin parallel strokes to draw the paint out. He then went back and with a brush he texturized some of the thicker deposits of purple. Malevich employed cobalt violet detected through strong cobalt and also phosphorus signals by XRF analysis, and a complex convolution of bands between 710 and 1171 by reflectance FTIR consisted with cobalt phosphate. Reflectance FTIR also indicated the presence of ultramarine blue, zinc stearates, barium sulfate, zinc white, and dammar. And here you could see the FTIR spectra and also the relation of Malevich's purple, examining area of purple color in correlation with other reference samples we have at the Art Institute. There are two important things in this, 2 important points in this purple area. First is the presence of ultramarine. According to the technical manuals and technical literature available at the time, because of the price of cobalt violet, it was a very hugely expensive pigment for the Russian market. It was recommended for paint producers, for tube paint producers, to mix cobalt violet with ultramarine blue. Even Rerberg, Malevich's teacher, referred to this mixture in his manuals. Suggested that either you should buy a cheaper version of cobalt violet, but don't expect to have a pure cobalt violet. It will be always mixed with ultramarine blue, or you have to, or the students, they had to mix cobalt violet with ultramarine blue in order to reduce the cost. Cobalt violet, it was a rare pigment, a very unique pigment for Russian standards at that time, and it had social, political, and aesthetic connotations. It was even mentioned in the bibliography that cobalt violet is not a pigment; it's a bourgeois material. So it was related with Parisian art and French art of the late 19th century, early 20th century. It became synonymous with modernism, and it entered the vocabulary of novelists and poets at that time. And that includes the characteristic example of Vladimir Mayakovsky. He wrote the poem Paul Verlaine and Paul Cézanne. I'm too shy to perform poetry, and I couldn't find a decent translation in English of this poem, but it's a very well poem for Russian standards. And he says that Cézanne, practically says, he writes that Cézanne invented the straight and curved line, and the whole world stood astonished. Paris, the color of Paris, is cobalt violet. Paris is in aniline. Aniline was a material that they were used for lighting. So Mayakovsky concludes that the color of Paris is cobalt violet. Paris can be seen via aniline, and that's the only things you could see out of the window of the coffee shop Rotonda. Rotonda was a coffee shop in Montmartre where Russian emigre artists used to gather, and that included Marc Chagall, Larionov, Gonzarova, Mayakovsky, and other emigre artists who lived in Paris at the time. It's not only Mayakovsky who wrote about cobalt violet. Another important thing in the use of cobalt violet by Malevich is the presence of dammar as identified by FTIR analysis, and the presence of a varnish layer in between the cobalt violet layers. It's in accordance with Malevich's philosophy about texture, factura, or facture, as it's translated from Russia to English. Malevich used to make differences in texture and also in appearance of gloss and matte areas in his paintings by applying local varnishes. Factura in Russian, it was a vital topic for Russian artists, and it can be translated in English, as I said earlier, as texture or facture. But in Russian, it's a more rich term. It denotes the material quality of work, how a work has been made, the way of making, and also it includes the meaning and making of materials used, the paint layers, their opacity or their transparency. So it was very crucial, this use and application of varnishes mixed or overlayering with different paints. Malevich used indeed this purple color in a very small group of his works, and only works that were meant to be displayed as manifesto or participated in famous Russian avant-garde exhibitions. And that included The Woman in a Tram, painted in 1914, Englishman in Moscow, and of course the Supremus number 50, and that was on display together with the football player at the 0.10 exhibition. So back to football player, how important was the painting for Malevich? In the 1920s, several art historians and critics who championed the utilitarian production art of the constructivists accused Malevich for aestheticism, individualism, and his suprematism for not being truly revolutionary art. Malevich never replied to these attacks, and instead he presented suprematism in his own unique way in the 1918 declaration published in the Univis Almanac. Football in space, wrote Malevich, the ball being the tangled mass of the art of the past centuries. Thank you for your attention.
I think it's very nice to see FTIR being used in that way. I wonder if you could say something about how easy it was for you to interpret the XRF spectra with those overlays, which we also heard about earlier from Jennifer.
That's a great question. Actually, it took several days, endless afternoons of discussion with Francesca, numerous questions, how this pick what could it mean for it, and also the more complicated the painting is, the most difficult it is to identify. But then again, the correlation of results with the XRF analysis and knowledge from previous analysis of other paintings by Malevich carried out in the last 10 years helped a lot to interpret the results. But just to give a short answer, there is a beauty on it, but it's so complicated.
Do you have some other questions from the audience? I think we might be quite hungry, but I'd like to thank you again, Maria. That was really nice.